Welcome to the Kit Building Forum. I like to call it Kit Building Techniques for Success because I believe strongly that if somebody buys a kit and fails at building it, they're never going to try it again, you know. So I want to make sure everybody tries it again and knows what they're doing when they're building. It says, I'm Kit Building Editor of CQ Magazine. We have not published since October, okay? I've already set Shiva for the magazine, okay? it's gone, but I have just been asked by a couple other publications today to start writing for them, and I will publish the results as soon as I'm locked in on them. It's a great opportunity, and I'm glad that I'll have an outlet for my monthly kit building exploits. A little bit about who I am. I was first licensed in 1969, so the QCWA booth is going to want me to pay for a 55-year pin. I was Elmered in amateur radio by a guy named Leo Meyerson, W0 Get Fat Quick, okay? What was he famous for? He started and owned World Radio Laboratories in Council Bluffs, Iowa, where they built the Globe and Galaxy radios and the Globe kits and things like that. So at the ripe old age of 8 years old, I got to sit on his lap while he called CQ, and he got some guy in Visalia, California. And he handed the mic to me, and that was just like, wow, okay, this is cool. But, of course, I was a little young to learn the code and stuff, so I picked up a general coverage receiver thanks to my dad. He bought me a little Hallicrafters S120 simple general coverage receiver, a 50-in-1 kit, which got me started in kit building, and a rocket radio. You know what a rocket radio was? It was a little crystal set, okay, shaped like a rocket, and you pull up and down the nose cone to tune in the local radio stations. You didn't need any batteries. I'm originally from Omaha. I used to commute there every day for work. I am retired now. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, the capital city. I've worked most of my career as an IT field tech. That means I got to fix broken computers, printers, networks, servers, printers, and printers, okay? Printers seem to be a big part of my deal after a while. I wrote the monthly kit building column in CQ Magazine since 2009, so I was approaching my ending 15 years writing for them when they went away. And through it all, I have taught lots of things, and I hope to teach a lot more in the future. I'm also the contributing author to the ARL Handbook since 2014. I have chapter number 23 is what I do, and that is the construction techniques chapter. You'll see me with a camera. I make musical slideshows, okay? And people tell me that they almost dread when my slideshow comes out, because when they see that slideshow and hear that song, every time they hear that song on the radio, they think of my pictures. This year's song will be Electric Avenue. My first trip to Dayton was 1975. Yes, I enter artistic photos in the Nebraska State Fair, and I've spoken here at Hamvention 32 times, so I guess I've been around the block a few times. So, let's talk about some items that we need to keep on hand. And this is something I like to emphasize the most. Assortments of pre-sorted, standardized parts. You want to have common values of resistors, capacitors, diodes, transistors, high Cs. I couldn't dream of affording that if I had to order it from Mauser or something like that. I have found these on Amazon, and these assortments come in little plastic boxes that are all divided up and labeled and everything, and they're anywhere from $8 to $16 for these assortments. For about $100, you can have about any kind of electronic part there is out there, and all assorted, push-button switches, plugs, jacks, pots, resistors, capacitors, transistors, ICs, regulators, Zeners, anything you want, you can get assortments of on Amazon. So if you get on Amazon and you look for resistor assortment, it's just amazing what you'll get. And it's already labeled and sorted for you. Why do we need that? We're going to get into that in a little bit. 9-volt battery snaps and battery holders. I like the 9-volt snaps that have longer wires because I've been running into these things in flea markets that are smaller Hamfests at home. Somebody will have a gadget and it doesn't work, okay? And I look at it and I thought, one guy had a $250 pocket-size antenna analyzer, and I thought, okay, why does he only want 20 bucks for this thing? And so I bought it, and I figured, what could be wrong with an antenna analyzer? And he said, well, oh, by the way, I put a new 9-volt battery in there and it still doesn't work. It won't light up. Okay, so I took it home, and I took the back off of it, and I took my meter and I looked at it, and I had the 9-volt battery on there, and guess what? There's not 9 volts making it to the board. Okay, so I just unhooked the battery snap, desoldered it from the board, soldered in a new one, trimmed the leads, and guess what? I have a working pocket-size antenna analyzer that I take with me on every POTA that I go on in SOTA. You want to have your commonly used plugs and jacks. Your 1/4-inch plugs, 1/8-inch, 2 and 3 conductor plugs, jacks, RCA phono plugs, jacks, PL259s, and all the adapters. Now, a lot of kits have SMA connectors now. That's become a big thing. Well, guess what? Just get an adapter. And there's a lot of places out there. One of my favorites is Tower Electronics. They are just indoors now. They are no longer in the flea market. At the end of my presentation, I have a slide that will give web addresses for sources of kits, and it gives booth locations for some of the vendors here at Hamvention. 12-volt coaxial plugs and jacks. Most kits are center pin positive, but we want to make sure to get it right. Most of them are 2.1 millimeter. Solder wick, okay? You're only going to pay like $3 or $4 for a little thing of solder wick. It's well worth it and well worth learning how to use it. I give a lot of hands-on demonstrations on how to use solder wick and desolder as well as to solder. Here's the trick. If you go out in that flea market, I can pretty well guarantee somebody's got a box on the ground that says free, and it's full of old circuit boards. Could be motherboards, could be anything, right? Old circuit boards. Guess what you do with those? Take them apart, okay? Use that to practice desoldering and soldering again. Okay, now, sometimes you'll try to heat up the solder and it doesn't work, okay? How come? It's because it was leaded solder, and leaded solder has a higher melting point. So one of my tricks is I just add more solder to it. And everybody says, well, wait a minute, you're trying to desolder. Why the heck are you adding more solder to it? Well, if you add like 6337 solder to it, it lowers the melting point. Then you can put that solder wick on there and it comes right off, okay? So a lot of circuit boards that you practice with might have non-leaded solder because that's required in certain parts of the world. Solder suckers, vacuum soldering, desoldering stations, we'll go over that in a little bit. Emery boards. Emery boards are a must, okay? Every time I go to the state fair, the home show, the boat show, whatever, I'll go by somebody's booth and they got all these emery boards that says Joe's Bar and Grill or something on it, into the bag, okay? Now I've got my year's supply, and they're great for doing toroids and things like that, which we'll also cover later. Cookie sheets. Okay, you want to keep peace in the households, right? You don't want to have solder burn marks on the kitchen table. So what I use is a cookie sheet. And you can use a placemat under that even to protect even more. Put a placemat under it and then a cookie sheet. Where do I get cookie sheets that are affordable? Now, if you're doing a club kit build, you can't afford like $4 or $5 a cookie sheet. But if you go to Dollar Tree, which I now call $1.25 tree, they are $1.25, and they have not the foil ones, but get the regular metal ones, and they're wonderful. And so I might do a group kit build, and I'll stop at the dollar store and spend like $12 or something on a bunch of cookie sheets, and then I tell them, guess what? Take it home with you. Keep the piece at home. and it's going to keep all that junk from getting on your floor and the carpet and things like that, especially solder blobs. Soldering mats are good. In fact, some of these soldering mats are magnetic and will stick to the bottom of the cookie sheet. But make sure the cookie sheet you get has a lip that goes all the way around it, okay? That keeps your parts from rolling off the floor and going into Never Never Land. Okay, the one piece of test equipment that you gotta have when you're a kit builder is a meter. How many of you have seen that darn one on the right, okay? Harbor Freight, okay? I used to complain bitterly about stuff at Harbor Freight. But I had one of those coupons, so I thought, okay, I'll try one of these things. That was several years ago. I put it next to my Fluke 77 Series 2, okay? It's surprisingly close. It's amazing. Now, it's got a little thing to plug in transistors to test them. Don't do it. Don't do it. It doesn't work, and you got to know which lead is which on the transistor, and a lot of times you don't. But we're going to go over something that will take care of that for you. On the left is a scope meter. You cannot get this one anymore. They have a newer version of it that sells for about $70. It's an oscilloscope and a multimeter all built into one, and it's anywhere from $60 to $80. The difference between this one that's on the screen here and the new ones, which I don't have one yet, is they have full color screens on them and cursors that tell you the peak-to-peak voltage, RMS voltage, things like that. 60, 80 bucks. Not only is it a multimeter, it's a scope. And those are valuable for when you're trying to troubleshoot problems in kits. Doesn't have to be expensive. Okay, when I was here at Hamvention about 8 years ago, some guy came up to me and says, Joe, you got to talk about this soldering station. It's really inexpensive. It's around $60. And this company makes them, and they sell them through eBay and Amazon. And there's also a web page here at the bottom left on your screen. And I said, where does this come from? And he says, well, you're not going to believe it. It comes from someplace in Nebraska. And I said, oh, come on, I live in Nebraska. He says, yeah, it comes from Lincoln, Nebraska. Look at the label on the box. And I looked at the address, and I thought, that's just across town from me. And I got to visit them, and I got some samples of different products, and they make an amazing set of stuff that they import, and then they package in Lincoln, Nebraska. This particular one is temperature controlled. Now, just because it has a dial doesn't mean it's temperature controlled. This one has a digital temperature readout, so you know that the temperature is going to be right. That is very important because once you bring that solder tip down to the pad where you're soldering and you add the solder to it, what's that going to do to the temperature of one of those $7 cheap irons, okay? It's going to draw it down, okay? And then when it sits on the cradle, what's it going to do? It's going to get way hot, okay? Well, you don't want that. You want it to give you a steady temperature. This thing will keep it plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius, which is the same as the standard for manufacturing. For 60 bucks, you can't go wrong. It comes with a solder mat. It comes with some solder. It comes with solder sucker. It's got wick. It's got extra tips. It's got board holders. I thought, wow, it even holds a roll of solder for 60 bucks. So it works pretty good. When you're looking at a soldering tool, you want it to be ESD safe, and that's electrostatic discharge. Now we're sitting in a room where the humidity is high, so we're not going to really worry about it here. And at home in Nebraska, same thing this time of year. In the wintertime, when it goes down to 10 degrees above or below zero, and you heat that air up, your humidity is so low that when you touch something metal, what happens? Kazap. But if you touch a CMOS part, how much voltage does it take to do that? Now, when I make a kazap, that's 10 kV, okay? If I was to touch a little part that's CMOS, those can go out with 30 volts. You're never going to feel that, okay? So I could do a whole nother seminar about ESD. Just ground your cookie sheet and you'll be fine. But be careful when you're dealing with low humidity. There's a whole nother set of soldering irons out there. And by the way, the last one I showed has a sleep mode. When you hang it up, like hanging up your phone, it calms down. It goes down to a much lower temperature, okay? And when you pick it up, it heats up within a few seconds. By the time it gets to your circuit board, it's already at full heat. As the heat gets drawn from it, it adds more right away so that it stays at the same temperature and the solder flows. Same thing with these little tiny things. It's now the TS101, okay? So it looks just slightly different than this. They sell for around $80 online, plus or minus a bit. You can get it on Amazon. You'll see it has 2 buttons on it, and those control the temperature, okay? The neat thing about this tiny little thing is it comes with a small power supply, kind of like a small laptop supply. And I take this with me when I travel. So in my bag, I might have one of these things, okay? If I'm really desperate and I don't have AC, I can plug 12 volts into it and it works, okay? And it cools down when I'm not using it. And it heats up whatever you want. And if I need it higher for desoldering and need to turn up that heat, guess what? I just turn it up. And so it has all the features of a full-size soldering station in a thing the size of a pen. Okay. If you're building a lot of kits or kits with a lot of parts, nobody builds a kit, including me, without making mistakes, okay? If I'm building a more complex kit, I'm going to have that tool on the left ready. And it sells for around $120, $130 on Amazon. It is a temperature-controlled soldering station, but I'm not going to use that for soldering parts of the board because the handpiece has a hollow tip, okay? And I put that tip over the connection, even let the little piece of wire go into it as it melts it. And I pull the trigger on it, it sucks the solder right out of that into a little chamber in the handpiece, okay? The vacuum pump is inside the box, and there's 2 hoses that go to the handpiece. And the neat thing about that is it'll clear the hole for you, the part just falls out. And you can preserve the part so that it's not going to be damaged, and you can put it where it belongs. Now the soldering station on the right, okay? Where do you find that one? Harbor Freight, okay? And I thought, oh, how can this be any good? Well, it turns out it's an analog one. It is still temperature controlled. It does not cool down when you're not using it, but it keeps a steady temperature. Comes with the holder and the sponge and all that, so you can keep your tip clean. And by the way, I always clean my tip when I hang it up and when I pick it up. These things sell for $44.95. How many of you have ever paid full price for anything at Harbor Freight? Okay, you get the 10%, 20, 15, 20% off coupons and stuff. That's when you go buy one of these. They also have a digital soldering station now, which is pretty cool. Solder, I recommend 6337 solder, and it's not the 6040 that you and I are used to over the years. 6337 is a slightly different formulation. We call that eutectic solder, and the reason we use that in kit building is it flows a lot nicer with hand soldering. And I verified this because 2 of the customers that I fixed printers and maybe a server, they had Heiko soldering stations all over the plant because they made electronic devices, okay? And they had 6337 solder. They used Kester, which is fine, and that's what I've used for many, many decades. But this stuff now at Harbor Freight, and I'm trying to remember the Harbor Freight part number on that, but if you look it up online and look up solder on there, you'll find this 6337 solder, and it's $19.95 for a half-pound roll, okay? Now, I recommend rosin core no clean because it looks better and doesn't leave the brown splotches on your circuit boards and so forth. And this particular width of solder, okay? Once again, do I ever pay $19.95 for it? I wait till it's on sale or they have one of those you know, so much % off anything, and I end up paying like only 14 bucks or something for something like that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's still tin lead. I do not recommend using lead-free solder because it is difficult to work with if you're hand soldering, okay? But when I did a group kit build in Germany 10 years ago, that was all they let me use. So you have to increase your temperature and just flow it a little longer, okay? But I don't recommend using it on any of the kits that we commonly build in this country. Some nice things to have: a variable voltage power supply with meters, especially dual meters for current and voltage, so you know what you're going to supply to that kit. And guess what I also recommend? When you set that, let's say your kit needs 9 volts, so you dial that supply to 9 volts and the meter says 9 volts, I still stick my fluke meter in it just to make sure that that thing is right, because you don't know. Okay, a frequency counter can be helpful. An oscilloscope. Right now, if you go out in the flea market, CRT scopes are as cheap as can be. I've seen Tektronix out there already that are like $90. A couple years ago, that would have cost you $400. But you can get LCD scope kits as cheap as $23 online, and they work just fine. Dummy load. Okay, whenever I'm building a transmitter, any kind of transmitter or transceiver, when I very first turn on the power, I always have a dummy load connected to it. Why? Because you don't know if there's a short on the board or something, your cat is standing on the key or something, and when you turn on, you don't want it to be key down into nothing. Why? Because a lot of kits don't have VSWR protection. So I always connect the dummy load first. Even if it's a transceiver, I'm not going to hear anything on the receiver except noise, the base noise floor. But I know that I'm not transmitting into nothing or a dead short or things like that. Dummy loads are not real expensive, and there are kits you can get to make QRP dummy loads. We talked about the vacuum desoldering station. That is really worthwhile if you're going to be really serious about building lots of kits. A general coverage receiver is a must for several reasons. One, some kits assume that you don't have a signal generator or a spectrum analyzer or things like that, but they tell you to take a general coverage receiver and bring the antenna wire close to the board and see if you can hear the local oscillator or the BFO or something and see what frequency that's on. So I use Yaesu FT817 is sitting there on my bench, and that is what I use for that purpose. It also lets me hear the signal that I transmit. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll also turn that on, and I'll see if I hear the local oscillator or see if I hear a carrier when I first turn on my kit. An AM/FM clock radio is good too for entertainment and time reminders. What I do is I listen to my favorite local classic rock radio station. Now, somebody at Hamvention about 4 years ago told me that I was at the group kit build at 4 Days in May, and I was sitting there soldering, and somebody says, "But you're not listening to your favorite radio station." So I set my phone on the table, opened the app, and boom, now I'm listening to Lincoln's Classic Rock. The only thing I caution you on that is that listening to your favorite music station is best. If you tune in talk radio, it's only designed to tick you off. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. So I don't listen to sports talk or political talk or news talk or whatever they call it nowadays while I'm building kits. I listen to music. You can string a wire out your window to test receivers. You want to have a roll holder to keep that solder roll in place, okay? And that it keeps it from becoming a cat toy, okay? I have 2 cats. They are the enemy of all kit builders, okay? I use the 6337 solder, 031 or 025 thickness, rosin core, no clean. That's my doctor's prescription. Somebody says, well, what about your 6040? Where do you use that? I use that on an antenna wire, PL259s, things like that. Okay, but I don't use it on circuit boards. I use 6337. And you want to have a way to put your kit away, because you're not going to get it all done in one sitting, because like I said, the enemy of all kit builders is cats. My two cats are Tesla and Marconi. Wonder where I come up with names like that. All right. This is something that you can buy at Bass Pro or Cabela's, or, well, I don't know what they have around here. I think they have Cabela's and Bass Pro around here. It's a tackle box, okay? It's a Plano 1354. But guess what? You can find it sometimes at Michael's or Hobby Lobby, okay? It's the same exact thing, but it's at Michael's, it's pink and lavender. They use it for jewelry, okay? If you go to Menards or Lowe's, you might find the same thing in yellow and black, but it's still the same thing. You see those 4 trays in the bottom? Those slide out, and they have movable partitions. And then I put the big parts, like the circuit boards, partly done things like that, case parts, in the top of that case, and then I have each one of the 4 in there labeled. So when I go to our QRP kit building group once a month, I got my choice of 4 different projects I could work on if we're not doing a group project. So we want to talk about sorting your parts out, because that's the magic that makes kit building work. I use either a cupcake tray. If you don't have kids, dogs, cats, whatever, you can use a cupcake tray. And I've been able to ground those for ESD. Tackle box works. You can ground the tray, like I said, for ESD. Cupcake trays, 6, 12, or 16 holders, okay? What I do is I sort the parts that I most often use the closest to me, so I'm not reaching over everything else. And when I'm done working, or if I need to pause or something, I can close the lid on that thing and snap it shut, okay? That way Marconi gets up there and he's kind of curious, right? He got up on my soldering iron and I thought he was going to get himself fixed a second time. Now this thing has movable partitions, so I can resize the chambers for what I have. Now you'll see I have resistors in the lower left, and then we have different kinds of capacitors, and then we got resistors and diodes and transistors and chokes. And we go in the back row, we got toroids, plugs, jacks, knobs, things like that, okay? Connectors. So we have the things that we use the most in the front row. Now some kits are stage by stage, and what that means is they got a lot of parts, and they want to make sure you get it done right. So in stage-by-stage kit building, we usually start from the power supply and we work onwards. So you can see I put little numbers in there because that's the stage number in the kit instructions, okay? So stage number 1 is usually the power supply. So when I put all those parts in the way the instructions tell me, what do? They tell you to test it, okay? So don't skip the tests, okay? So when I'm done with that stage, that cup on the left, lower left, should be empty, okay? So we usually start from the power supply and go onward the way the manuals are written. Then usually the AF stage, and then the local oscillators and so forth. And we always test before we go on. Now, when you do a stage like the BFO or something, it might have 6 or 8 parts. Okay, so you put those parts in and you do the test. If it fails the test, then you know you only put in that small handful of parts. Once you've got that right and it passes the test, you're at a stopping point. You can take a break, you can go to McDonald's, whatever, and guess what? It's going to be there waiting for you the next time you're doing it. And you know, you're confident because you know that the kit works to that point. So that's kind of neat on the more complex kits. Once again, you're doing smaller numbers of parts at a time. You put the parts for each stage in their own container, and like I said, there should be no parts left. And make sure you have the test equipment that they ask you to have. Now, some kits have no sequence at all. You get a bag of parts, okay? And you got to put them in. So I start with the resistors and then the capacitors and so on, and I work up the hierarchy of electronic parts. You got to check, because a lot of times you might have a capacitor that gets partly hidden by a BNC connector or something like that. And so you want to make sure that what you're doing is not going to block the access to another one. And when you've put all the resistors in and you've checked them off the list and know that their R1 is where R1 should be and so forth, there shouldn't be any left over. There is an exception to that rule. There's a lot of kits like Pixies and so on that are designed for multiple bands. So what do you do with the leftover parts? Number one, you make sure you didn't need them. Number two, you know those parts assortments we talked about earlier? Guess what? Put them in there. Now you got extra sorted parts. The trouble with toroids. Now, how many of you cringe when you see a kit that's got toroids in it? Yeah, a lot of people will do that. A lot of people just say, I'm not going to do that. I was that way for a while. Now, what kind of toroid are we looking at here? Okay, that's a transformer. Okay, you got a primary and a secondary, don't you? How do we count the turns? Through the center of the donut. Okay, every time that wire passes the center of the donut. Now, why don't we use the outside or the top or the bottom? It's because the computer program they use to calculate this out knows that the first turn and the last turn don't make it quite all the way around. So the computer knows that when they calculate it out, and so we're counting the turns as they are in the middle of the donut. You got to follow their instructions explicitly. In some of the QRP Labs kits, they all have to be the same direction. You cannot do it opposite directions or it cancels out and the oscillator doesn't work. There's different ways to get rid of the insulation, okay? Sometimes it's really tough, and so what you end up doing is, sometimes if it's really thick, I take a cigarette lighter and I torch it, and then I take the emery board and I get the black stuff off, and now it's shiny gold, and then I tin it, okay? But some of the wire, in fact, a lot of them in kits now are what we call thermalese wire. So what we do is we take our soldering iron and we turn it all the way up. We get it to 900 or whatever the top end is. And then we take our solder and we make a little teardrop size drop of solder on the end of the tip. And then I hold that tip near the toroid itself on that wire. And after about a second or two, what happens? Smoke gets in your eyes. Yeah, it's going to smoke because it's burning off the insulation. And then I slowly draw the solder tip and that drop of solder over the wire and down farther away from the toroid. Now, I don't have to go very far, just enough so you can get it through the circuit board, and I trim off the extra and so forth. But the neat thing is that not only is it removing the insulation, it is tinning the wire. Now, why is that important on toroids? It's because when you solder a toroid in, you're making both a physical and an electrical connection. And a lot of toroids have connections on both the top and the bottom of the board. So you want to make sure that solder flows through and a tinned wire conducts the solder through right away, okay? So that toroid is not going to be intermittent. It's going to be physically strong, so you won't have any microphonics or anything like that in your oscillator. And it stays in place and it works, okay? So I always tell people, take your time and enjoy the experience. Now, for the real toroid haters out there, I tell you to do them first. Do the toroids first. Do all the winding and counting and do the leads and so forth. And guess what? Then you label them. T1, T2, L1, L2, L4, whatever, and you put them in your parts thing. So when it comes time to put that on the circuit board, it's just like plugging in a transistor, okay? They're all ready for you when you're ready to go right through the kit. There's common mistakes that we make. Some RF chokes look like resistors, so you want to check their markings. Watch out for electrolytic and tantalum capacitors, because if they're put in backwards, they make really good firecrackers. And it's not the 4th of July yet. Use a magnifying light. I recommend you never use an incandescent one. I don't think they even sell them anymore, but some people still have them. I use a fluorescent or an LED-based lighted magnifier with the bright white light. That way the color temperature of the light makes the colors come out on resistors and so forth, and you can more easily check them. Okay, and there's 1/8 watt resistors in a lot of kits. The stripes are real small, and so magnifiers are great. Use your meter, use your own meter. That will tell you even more. You want to watch the diode markings so you get those incorrect, and bend the leads really carefully because those thin glass diodes can break. So you want to be really careful, as well as the tiny RF chokes and those little itty bitty tiny capacitors are really vulnerable to being broken. So you got to be really careful with those. I'm going to show you the slide that shows where you can get this stuff. Grab your phones and take a picture of this, and I will show this slide again at the end of the show. EAE sales is right out the door, okay? If you go out that door and look straight over towards the flea market, that's where he is. And he probably has the most stuff that kit builders use anywheres here at Hamvention. Tower Electronics is over there in building 3. Andromace is out in the flea market. You got QRP Labs, which makes kits that are inside. There's all sorts of stuff in here and out in the flea market. The other ones, you can look at their web pages. VA Kits has a lot of kits that are under $15, really inexpensive. They're good for group kit builds, as are some of the kits from 4-State QRP. But the other suppliers, we're going to show you a little bit about them in the next couple of slides. Now, for about 12 bucks, you can go buy this thing. I like to give the Ronco speech. It slices, it dices, it purees. Now, it says it's a transistor tester. That's only a tiny part about what this thing does. You see those terminals down there on the lower right that says 1, 2, 3. What I do is I get those clip leads where you get a bundle of them for like $3 or something. I cut them, okay? And then I strip off about a 1/4 inch of insulation and I tin that so it's nice and stiff. And I put that in there. You can have 3 different colors. They can be blue, green, and orange, just as long as the colors are different. And then you take those 3 leads. You can clip them to the 3 leads on a transistor. And when you push the button, it says, oh, that's an NPN transistor. Here's the HFE, which is the gain, and the forward voltage drop. Whoa, that's a lot of information. So it even identifies the leads on unknown transistors. That's pretty cool. If you clip a resistor to any pair of those wires, it says, oh, there's a resistor there, and this is its value. It's incredible. It'll tell you if a transistor is CMOS. So it says, oh, it's a CMOS transistor, and this is drain, gate, and source. Or emitter-based collector on the PNP and NPNs, or SCRs, or triacs. It identifies anything that you put in it. If you put a toroid in there, it's going to give you the DC resistance and the inductance. 12 bucks. And this is a kit. And so this is kind of fun to put together. Runs on a 9-volt battery, anything actually from 5 to 12 volts. If you don't want to put one together, these guys sell them online for about $19, okay? It is also a kit, but you don't solder anything. What you're going to do is you're going to do some tedious peeling of coating off of the plexiglass, and you just screw it together. There's no instructions or anything. You just kind of do it. The battery goes in there, and I thought, okay, I'm bolting this battery in this thing. Oh, that's not real convenient, but the good thing is, number one, when you push the button, it displays what the part is, and it tells you the battery voltage and so forth, and then it shuts itself off. So it's not going to use the battery very much. Now you notice I put a little transistor in there into what we call a ZIF socket, or zero insertion force. Okay, what I do is those same 3 clip leads. I just stick them in there. Now I've got the clip leads again. Okay, and this thing lights up. I really like it, and I use the heck out of this. I do not do a group kit build without having a couple of these things around. This is a kit that's put out by the 4-State QRP group. The construction techniques of this AM broadcast receiver is soldering to pads. So what does that mean? When you desolder, all you do is you take the solder tip, tuck it back under the lead, lift it up. Don't need solder wick, don't need desoldering tools. Makes it very easy to fix it, great for a beginner. Works great. The only caution I have is listening to AM talk radio. So we have an oldies station on 1480, and so I usually tune into that. But I did get some complaints when I put this in CQ magazine. The guy says, I love the kit. I was so embarrassed that my son was listening to sports talk radio. And that can get really, really, really bad. So, and nowadays that the half of it is talking about sports betting. And so it's not really good for kids to listen to. But you can always tune in the oldies stations. It's a fun radio, and it works quite well. Here's a kit that I like to do for first-time kit builders and groups. It's a power supply. It's called the wall wart tamer. It will allow you to use, I use old laptop power supplies. You ever see one of those connectors on the end that's a Dell connector? I cut it. I cut it off, okay, throw it away. And then I take the two leads that come out and I treat the leads and I tin them and it goes in. But you can also use a doorbell transformer or a furnace thermostat transformer that's like 24 volts or up to 30 volts AC going into there. Not the wall socket, but you're going to use anything from roughly 15 volts AC up to 30 volts AC. It's got a full wave bridge rectifier in there. So guess what? The input doesn't matter to the polarity, okay? It can be, you don't know what the polarity of that laptop connector might be, but we put it in there, we don't care, okay? But what comes out, we do care. So you got filter capacitors, you got a regulator, and you got a tiny itty-bitty trim pot. Everybody complains about that. I say, okay, go buy a 5K linear pot and just wire it into there instead of that little one, okay? Build it into a nice box. Put a voltmeter on it. Wow, you've got a neat bench supply. It only puts out about 1.5 amps, but that'll run a lot of QRP kits up to a few watts of RF. So it's really good because once you have that power supply, you can build anything and power it from that, okay? Now, the next one, remember we all talked about cringing about toroids, okay? This is a 20-meter CW transceiver. And everybody says, oh my God, those Pixie receivers, you can't hear anything. Well, this is not a Pixie. This thing responds to signals down to minus 126 dBm, okay? That means it's just microvolt range, okay? It hears really, really good and pretty reasonable selectivity on it. Runs on a 9-volt battery, puts out 1 watt of RF on CW. It's got the key built in. Where's the toroids? Where's the inductors? They are spiral wound on the circuit board. This was designed by David Kripe, NM0S, who is here, and he will be at 4 Days in May tonight, and he runs that operation there at the 4 Days in May. And he designed this. He is a senior level RF design engineer at Collins Aerospace. Yes, he's a Collins radio engineer, and he designed this kit. And he designs a lot of the 4-state kits, so it's a lot of fun. All you do is plug in the headset, turn the switch on, and hook an antenna to it. Everybody says, well, it's got no volume control. Well, guess what? You can get these headsets that got the up-down buttons in them. Okay, this kit, I still have it on here because he's still selling a few of these. He's selling them out. He is getting out of the kit building business. But I wanted to show this because it's an interesting example of what is going on in kit building. And that is that there are surface mount parts, okay? You can look at the lower board there and the upper board, and you can see there's a whole bunch of surface mount parts, but they're already placed for you. Most kits that have surface mount parts, those kits are already mounted on the board for you. So all you got to do is the through-hole parts. What he did is he had seen my seminar, and he says, well, I'm going to sidestep your whole sorting out parts. I'm going to sort them for you. And so he has an electronics manufacturing plant. And so he has the parts in these ribbons of plastic, okay? And you open up one part of it by taking a scissors and then shake the parts out into your work surface. So you do one section at a time. So when you stop, they're still all sealed up. Okay, so you put it in a little box and that's it. You don't have to worry about loose parts out. That's kind of neat. I really like this kit. I've taken this out on POTA several times. It gets really good reports. It doesn't have any menus or anything, but it does have a digital display. This is what it looks like in my little POTA kit for it. I have a notepad and a pen. Where do I get all these? Everybody says, where do you get all those neat little notepads? I go to ag shows with my fellow hams that are farmers, okay? I'm not a farmer, but I go with them anyways, and I come home with about 20 pounds worth of freebies. T-shirts, hats, whatever, and lots of notepads and pens, okay? So those go into my POTA kit. That straight key on the right, I make that with my 3D printer, and that is the model key that I supply to the youth on the air every year. We have, this year, I think I made 30 of those 3D printed kits for the Youth on the Air program. I keep earbuds and everything else in there in the power cord, so that little container is ready to go. This is a kit that I highly recommend for first-time builders. It's a simple FM broadcast receiver. Now, it does have a surface mount IC, but I can teach even first-time kit builders how to put that IC on the kit. And once they've done that, they're not even afraid to surface mount parts anymore. And it's a lot easier than you think. What I do is I solder the two corners. Then I take the soldering iron, I run right down it, and I don't care if I leave shorts or anything on it. Just as long as I got solder on every pin, I do both sides. And then I turn the board upright, and I put the soldering tip sideways on it, and I draw the excess off onto the tip, shake it off, clean it, do the other side, and guess what? It looks professional. And it works all the time. And this is a stereo FM receiver. I think these kits are about $5, okay? If you get that. Now, you got extra costs. I get this on Amazon, believe it or not. No, it's you just have to look at an FM DIY kit. And I can come up with a link. If you send me an email, I will send you a link of different suppliers that have it. The next kit.
About that previous kit. No, you said, no, not that one. The FM receiver.
Okay.
You said that's an easy kit for
Yeah.
a beginner.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can you give an estimate on this takes 2 hours, 4 hours?
I've never taken more than an hour.
For a beginner.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never taken more than an hour with it. If you carefully show them how to solder and so forth and walk them through some of the parts, sometimes I end up helping them with the IC, but at least they learn the method to do it. And you can see there's only a handful of parts, buttons and so on that are on there. It works really well. And you can see stereo earbuds. I supply those with the kits as well. I like to use this one as a beginner's kit because they walk out of there with an FM stereo receiver that actually is reasonable sensitivity. It actually picks up a lot of signals. But it also goes below our FM broadcast band. It starts at 76 megahertz and scans up to 108. Everybody says, well, what do I do with that? Go to a football stadium because some of them have these special receivers that you got to pay extra for. They operate below the FM band in the old TV channels, and this picks it up. I went to a Nebraska game one time that they were testing that system, and it worked. It picked it up. This is a kit that we're doing in the Heartland Homebrewers and QRP group in Nebraska. I found this online, and then I bought the parts in bulk, and then I 3D printed the plastic parts on my 3D printer. So all they got to do is put this together, wind the balun and stuff, and cut the wires, and you have a nice QRP dipole. I made a 10-meter one, and the SWR is no higher than 1.8 on any part of the whole 10-meter band. That's wonderful. You can use it for 10 FM. You can use it for beacons or parks or sideband, whatever you want to do. I order the parts in bulk through Fastenal and some other sources online. and so it doesn't cost as much. Some tips. Remove all the distractions. Let your voicemail pick it up. RTFM stands for Read the Fine Manual. Yeah. Sometimes I say the other word as well. Use your cookie sheet to keep things from getting away from you. Make sure you have your batteries and power supply ready, plugs, jacks, and cables. Now, I buy batteries in bulk at Sam's Club or Costco. It's a good deal. But what I do is I test each battery before I put it in, because sometimes that 48 pack of batteries is not 48 good ones, okay? Keep your standard spare parts on hand. Keep your soldering tip clean. Use good lighting and magnification. Take your time and enjoy the fun. Now, this is what I look like at the end of sweepstakes where I live. Everybody wants Nebraska, so it's fun, and I've made a few plaques in sweepstakes, being a good signal from Nebraska. This is the slide once again. Use your camera, and this shows the location of the ones that are at Hamvention, and the ones on the bottom are websites for kit suppliers.
Just one comment on the Plano fishing tackle box you're talking about. Don't get the one from Harbor Freight.
No.
The plastic is very, very brittle.
Yeah, it's
Plano. It's just that spend the extra.
yeah, I've seen the one there, and it's really thin and stuff, and they're not easy to change the partitions. The Plano one works great. Anybody else? Thank you so much for coming out.